He was compared to robber baron Robert Maxwell this morning, but tonight he is fighting back. From his yacht somewhere in the Aegean, allegedly, Philip Green demands an apology from the MP who linked the two men.
We're now in a position where somebody has plundered a company, taken fortune beyond the dreams of avarice out of that company, and left the pension scheme in a worse state than any of the Maxwell pension schemes were left in.
Also on News at 10. Security has stepped up across Germany as it's revealed the suicide bomber at a music festival had sworn allegiance to Islamic State. Chaos on the convention floor. Hillary Clinton's coronation is starting to look a little like Donald Trump's. And I think I fit the chair, says New England football manager Sam Allardyce, but I should have been given it 10 years ago.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. If you're contemplating whether you will ever be able to afford a foreign holiday again, or even for the first time, then this may not be good for your blood pressure. This is the island of Skopelos in the Aegean, where we think the businessman Sir Philip Green, is sunning himself on his newest yacht, Lionheart. He has 3. So what, you may say? Fair enough, that's capitalism. Except that today MPs issued a devastating report saying that it was anything but fair enough. He was the unacceptable face of capitalism, they said. One even compared him to the newspaper baron Robert Maxwell, who stole money from the Daily Mirror pension fund and then disappeared off the back of his own yacht just off the Canary Islands. But tonight, Sir Philip wasn't having any of it. The comments were outrageous, he said, and they must be withdrawn.
Philip Green's success as a businessman made him a billionaire. He moves in the same circles as presidents and prime ministers, superstars and supermodels. He was knighted for services to retail, but today 2 committees of MPs judged that when Sir Philip offloaded BHS, the business was left on life support and that he represents the unacceptable face of capitalism. The 2 committee chairs told me Sir Philip is ultimately responsible for the company's failure.
He bought the company in 2000. He extracted enormous amounts of wealth for his family. He didn't invest sufficiently in the business and didn't contribute enough to the pension scheme. And then when it was heading for the cliff, he sold it to somebody who was incompetent.
Sir Philip Green, the unacceptable face of capitalism, isn't that a bit strong?
It's unacceptable in the first instance that he plundered the firm. It's unacceptable that he ran the firm onto the rocks.
Comments today, you actually said that Sir Philip Green was worse than Robert Maxwell.
Yes, indeed.
Do you stand by that?
Absolutely.
Explain why.
We're now in a position where somebody has plundered a company, taken fortune beyond the dreams of avarice out of that company, and left the pension scheme in a worse state than any of the Maxwell pension schemes were left in.
Those comments have triggered a furious response. Tonight, in a letter, Sir Philip says the comparison with Maxwell is highly defamatory and completely false. He said the MP's investigation was biased and unfair, and added he is sad and sorry for all the BHS people caught up in this horrid story. But he insists he is not to blame. BHS went bust in April. 20 stores like this one in Rotherham have since closed. The remaining 143 will shut their doors within 4 weeks. In the 14 years that Sir Philip owned BHS, it went from a profitable company to one that was heavily loss-making. The company's pension schemes went from surplus to unsustainable deficit. MPs conclude that the £300 million Sir Philip took out of the business in the good times ultimately weakened it. Sir Philip recently took possession of a 3rd luxury yacht. Meanwhile, 11,000 BHS staff are set to lose their jobs, and 22,000 members of the company's pension schemes face the prospect of less generous benefits unless the deficit is plugged. Among them is Lynn Macmillan.
I think what can be done now is that Philip Green puts his hands in his very deep pockets, brings out his chequebook and writes a cheque to pay off the deficit for the BHS pension fund. And if that means him selling a couple of his yachts, so be it, because you can only be on one yacht at once.
By the time Dominic Chappelle bought BHS for £1 last year, MPs believe the failure of the business was inevitable, but he too is censured. Their report concludes he was out of his depth and over-optimistic to the point of arrogance. BHS's 88 years on the high street is coming to an end, but the fallout from its failure has some way to run.
Well, there may not be an obvious link between the collapse of BHS and Britain voting for Brexit, but in the seemingly endless search for explanations of that referendum result, much has been made of the powerful and the rich acting solely in their own interest and ignoring the greater good. So the criticism of Sir Philip Green, its former boss, by MPs is perhaps of the moment. But is it fair? Well, our business editor Joel Hills is here. Joel, maybe we can just begin with, he wants an apology. Sir Philip Green from Frankfield, is he going to get one?
No, he's not, absolutely. No surprise in a sense. The two men have clashed before, but Frankfield is absolutely crystal clear this evening. He doesn't regret what he said. He said the context has been misconstrued. And therefore, he doesn't, Sir Philip Green says he won't.
Yes, let's get that right.
Yes, exactly.
But just moving on, the kernel of this seems to be he bought the company for 200 million, or his wife did. It was making a profit. Its pension fund was in surplus. And then they took out more money than they were making in profits in the years afterwards. To the layman's eye, that doesn't look quite right. How normal or not normal do you think that is?
Look, I've spoken to directors who were sitting and working with the company when the dividends were paid, and they are clear that Sir Philip Green was taking this money out at a time when the business seemed to be going great guns. They did not have an issue with it. Now, MPs take the view that that was fine, but the problem was when things started to turn, money wasn't invested in the business, there was chronic underinvestment, and Sir Philip ignored repeated calls from the trustees to top up or increase payments to the pension scheme. I mean, you heard Frank Field in the interview being very, very clear. Look, Sir Philip Green was knighted for services to retail. This report sits very ill with that title. Field says he should only keep his gong if he writes that cheque that closes the gap in the pension scheme. I guess
that's the sum of it then, isn't it? How, in your estimation, how much is Philip Green actually worth, and what would it take, in your view, to restore what's left of his reputation?
Well, Sir Philip Green makes the Sunday Times rich list. They estimate his wealth at just over £3 billion. Now, the interesting thing is that the cost of plugging the hole in the pension fund is estimated by Frank Field MP at being £700 million. Now, Sir Philip Green has said he will fix this problem. He did say that 6 weeks ago. He hasn't yet said how he'll do it or how generous he's prepared to be. But in a sense, what MPs are asking is that he give away or give back a very significant part of his fortune. It's inconceivable that he will give that much, I would suggest. But there is he's clearly stung by the criticism here. I think you can expect a response of sorts.
Joel, thank you very much indeed. Now, the German word Angst could have been created for what that country is experiencing right now, an unfocused dread about the human condition or the state of the world in general. And that is because the fourth attack in Germany within a week, an explosion near a music festival, was, after all, the work of a suicide bomber who had allied himself to so-called Islamic State. The bomber, a Syrian, arrived in Germany 2 years ago but was refused asylum. The motive for his attack? Anger at what he saw as Germans' opposition to Islam. Now, after this latest act of violence, Germany is stepping up police patrols at train stations and airports. The bomber's original target in the city of Ansbach had been the 2,000-strong crowd inside the city's open music festival. But when he was refused entry for not having a ticket, he headed towards a nearby wine bar where he blew himself up and injured 15 people.
Even by the standards of Bavaria's bloody summer, this was a disturbing milestone. A suicide bomb in a rucksack spewed fragments of metal across the crowd. The attacker had tried to get into the music festival, but detonated his device outside.
And then I remember my little sister was back in there, and so I ran back towards the entrance of the concert, and I saw a man laying injured on the floor with blood on his face.
When Bavarian investigators studied a video message on his phone today, their suspicions were confirmed. Yes, this was an act of terrorism. The Interior Minister said he pledges in the name of Allah his allegiance to the well-known Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and expressly announces an act of revenge against the Germans because they're standing in the way of Islam and as retribution for the killing of Muslims. Germany's first ISIS suicide bomber lived here. where fuel canisters and hydrochloric acid were found this morning. He left Syria after being wounded in the war, but 2 weeks ago was given a deportation order. His housemate said he told him about his escape from Aleppo.
Did he talk about IS, about politics, about what was going on?
Well, when he met to me last year, first he told me that why I am here. He told me that in our country, the people, the extremist group and the government forces, they are fighting against each other and they are killing to the innocent people as well. And that is the reason that I left my country and I am here.
But he didn't express any sympathy for any groups like
No.
that?
Germany is becoming too used to these acts of violence. Last Friday in Munich, 9 people were killed by gunmen obsessed with school shootings. But it was an attack by an Afghan man 4 days earlier, slashing train passengers with an axe, that was the first here to be claimed by IS.
Nazis raus! Nazis raus!
Tonight, near the scene of last night's attack, passionate exchanges about migration. Protesters against refugees chanted, "Go home." They were outnumbered by supporters of the refugee community. This has become the most divisive issue in this country.
And Rohit is with us now. Rohit, the USA, Britain, France to some degree, all traditionally targets of terrorism, some for a very long time. Germany not particularly in the past. Is that, in your view, definitively changing, and if so, why?
Well, let's be clear about this, Tom. There are many reasons for the attacks that we've seen over the last few days. For example, the authorities here are clear that the attack in Munich on Friday had nothing to do with terrorism. However, what are people here blaming? Well, the attacks last Monday and yesterday were caused by people who had come to this country from outside. And so the issue here that people are talking about is less about terrorism itself and more about migration. People are rounding on Angela Merkel, as we saw in those protests at the end of my report. And they're blaming her in many ways for the willkommen policy of allowing hundreds of thousands of migrants into this country, including 150,000 from Syria specifically since the start of last year. However, many people, including some of those pro-refugee demonstrators we saw earlier in that report, are clear that the issue here is not only about terrorism, but about mental health and about many other things too.
Okay, Rohit, thank you very much indeed. Now, in the run-up to the EU referendum, we did a couple of reports about what a difference a Leave vote could make to the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. Well, now it has happened. It will become the only land border between the UK and the European Union. Today, on a visit to Northern Ireland, the Prime Minister said she didn't want a return to the barriers and checkpoints of the past. Businesses there are certainly hoping she's as good as her word.
The Brexit vote divided the nations of the UK. England and Wales voted to leave the EU. Scotland and Northern Ireland wanted to stay. And Northern Ireland may feel the effects of Brexit most acutely as the only part of the country to share a land border with the EU. So the Prime Minister came to Belfast today to try to soothe concerns about that border.
Nobody wants to return to the borders of the past. What we do want to do is to find a way through this that is going to work, deliver a practical solution for everybody, as part of the work that we're doing to ensure that we make a success of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union.
But before the referendum result, there had been stark warnings about what Brexit would do to the border, including this from one Theresa May.
You couldn't have an open border between a country with free movement and a country outside the EU.
But one glance at Ireland's picturesque border shows you the problem. This can't be completely closed either. A second option would be immigration controls between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. The Deputy First Minister says it might be both.
I envisage the real probability that there would be a hard border to deal with the issue of immigration, which, as I say, would be very detrimental for us in the north. And I also envisage a hard border between the island of Ireland and Britain.
So you think there'll be both between the Republic of Ireland and between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK?
Well, I don't think that it can be ruled out.
Of course, it's not just the freedom of movement of people that could be controlled after Britain leaves the EU. The old customs post here could be pressed back into action, as well as goods are also checked. And that could have serious implications for businesses on both sides of this border. Haldane Fisher export roof trusses and other building supplies to the Republic of Ireland. A hard border could be bad news.
I think that would take us back many years. When we did have the hard border, it certainly caused an awful lot of delays. There was additional paperwork, and it did restrict our trade across the border.
Would that cost you money and potentially jobs here?
It certainly would, yes.
The problem here is how to manage the split with the EU without the economy or the delicate constitutional arrangements falling over altogether. Carl Dillon, News at 10, Newry.
Despite all the controversy at last week's Republican Party convention, in fact, probably because of it, Donald Trump has got a bigger bounce in the opinion polls than perhaps even he hoped for. They are now showing him with a lead over his Democratic rival, Hillary Clinton, of up to 5%. Temporary? Maybe, because this week it is Mrs. Clinton's turn to shine at her party's convention, or at least it should be. It looks tonight, though, like we're going to see as much anger as adulation.
Hillary, not Trump! Not Hillary, not Trump!
Now it is the Democratic Party's turn to feel the outrage of members who feel betrayed and abandoned by the establishment.
Hell no, DNC! We will vote for Hillary!
These protests in downtown Philadelphia today are not just for Bernie Sanders. They are, viscerally, against Hillary Clinton.
Because I do not trust her. I did not vote for her 8 years ago. And since she's been Secretary of State, she's proven that she's a warmonger.
To many of us, Donald Trump is the lesser evil of the two. We can get him out after 4 years. It'll take 8 years to get her out.
Her former rival Bernie Sanders is trying to corral his supporters, pointing out the danger of the alternative.
We have got to defeat Donald Trump.
But then just listen to how the crowd reacts when he proposes the Democrats unify around the official nominee.
And we have got to elect Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine.
Hillary Clinton is facing a significant challenge from within. The head of the party had no more luck in her call for unity.
All right, everybody now, settle down.
She's now been forced to resign after emails were leaked suggesting that party officials, who were meant to be neutral, had tried to tip the scales in favour of Clinton. It means that Hillary is being assailed by both sides. This from Republicans at their convention last week.
Lock her up! Lock her up! Lock her up!
And now this from Democrats who back Sanders.
What is crystal clear here on the streets is that there isn't just a Never Trump movement amongst Republicans. There is also a Never Hillary movement amongst Democrats. On both sides, there is anger and alienation.
To Republican criticism, she had this response.
I don't know what their convention was about, other than criticizing me. I seem to be the only unifying theme that they had.
But dissent within her own party is more alarming. As the convention opens tonight, the Clinton campaign is in mounting trouble. Robert Moore, News at 10, Philadelphia.
Well, the politics of the Western world hardly seems calm anywhere, but as Robert said, it wasn't supposed to be like this for Hillary Clinton. In the latest in our series of election reports on the divided states of America, we wanted to find out why Mrs. Clinton is so unpopular amongst some of the very voters who should, according to conventional political wisdom, at least be right behind her. So Julie has been to the swing state of Pennsylvania, to Jefferson County, where Mrs. Clinton even beat Barack Obama in the primaries of 2008, yet where she now faces a struggle to beat Donald Trump.
The Jefferson County Fair in full swing. Grassroots Americana in a rural corner of a swing state. It feels a million miles from the Democratic convention.
And they're off.
But in a spot where Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders squeezed Hillary Clinton out of the primaries, they're sending her a searing message. In this barn, the farmers have a whole host of reasons not to vote for her, and 2 of them are registered Democrats.
I love the way that she handled herself when everything went on in the White House with her husband. But everything that's gone on since then, there's been too many, I hate to say it, but I feel like there's been too many lies.
And from her husband, an opinion few might be so frank to articulate.
I guess, I'm old school, I'm a dairy farmer, so I don't know if you go to the Middle East, what them countries would think of a woman leader of the United States, how that would be handled and how the respect for that would be. Would you sooner send your mother or your father to go deal with a bully? In my mind, you go send your father.
Down at the fair's demolition derby, a metaphor just too irresistible for such bruising times in US politics. Both Trump and Clinton battered by becoming their party's least liked candidates in modern presidential history.
Everyone knew this was going to be one of the dirtiest and most bitter fights for the White House in decades, but few were prepared for quite such a race to the bottom as this. Among the Democrats here, many are saying that they'll vote for Hillary Clinton because she is, as they see it, the lesser of 2 evils. And that's a line we've heard again and again.
People that don't like her here don't like her here. It's not tepid. It's either yes or no.
When Democrat Congress hopeful Kerith Taylor is on the doorsteps of Jefferson, it's difficult for her to even mention Clinton's name. But as a Bernie Sanders supporter, she's now happy to fall in behind her and wants others to do the same.
She has my vote and my colleagues' votes. It's just our job to make sure that she beats Trump, because that's a very frightening outlook.
And what about the young women of Jefferson County? The generation above them, raised on the feminist struggle, might want Clinton to break through the final glass ceiling. But for them, a woman on the presidential ticket just isn't a big deal.
I'm a big feminist, but I don't feel like she stood for feminist values the way Bernie did. She doesn't sound very genuine when she talks.
I'm not for abortion. I am for guns and just everything. I'm against everything she's for. I would love to see a woman president, just not Hillary.
I think all politics are toxic. I mean, it's a constant battle between the two. I mean, even before they figure out who the candidates are going to be, they're fighting at each other's necks already. So probably just not going to vote for either of them.
In Jefferson and across the US, Clinton knows getting the young Democrats who overwhelmingly went for Bernie Sanders on her side is now crucial. In a race she could never have dreamt could be so difficult, Hillary Clinton has a hill to climb. Julie Etchingham, News at 10, Pennsylvania.
Well, Robert is still in a very noisy Philadelphia tonight. Robert, it's not the start to the convention Hillary would have wanted, but how much trouble is she in?
Well, what we have learned, certainly in the last few hours, in fact, what we're seeing right now here on the floor of this convention is that Hillary Clinton simply cannot take the unity of this party for granted. She is looking over her shoulder and has to be recognizing there are many white working class voters who are Democrats who are also finding Donald Trump's message that the system is rigged very appealing. They also find that his anti-free trade message is resonating. So it certainly is the case that polls today are showing that Donald Trump is looking marginally ahead of Hillary Clinton. That said, also bear in mind, though, that Hillary Clinton is an extraordinarily resilient candidate. So it's no surprise that Donald Trump is going to have a big challenge in his in the race ahead. And certainly in her favour, in Hillary Clinton's favour, is the fact that she is both astonishingly resilient and also that Donald Trump for Republicans is both a very flawed candidate.
OK, Robert, sorry, very lively convention floor there. Thank you very much. Now, when the International Olympic Committee ducked out yesterday of banning the entire Russian team from the Olympics for state-approved drug taking, it passed the buck to the governing bodies of individual sports. Well, today, World Swimming banned 7 Russian competitors, and there could be more decisions like that over the next few days. Well, our sports editor, Steve Scott, is here. Steve, not long to go till the opening ceremony. We can see the Russian flag now, but how many athletes are actually going to be traipsing on behind it?
Well, I actually think there's going to be quite a few. If the Russians look at their team that they wanted to take, 380, I reckon, well in excess of 300, probably nearer 350 will be behind that flag when it comes to the opening ceremony. In fact, the Russians said today that they only think 8 of their athletes don't fit the criteria, so that gives you some idea. And they might have only escaped their blanket ban yesterday, but as you can see, the first lot started arriving in Rio this morning on a flight from Moscow. So what's the full process from here on in then? Well, there are 28 federations who govern the 28 Olympic sports. I think we can see how it works now. The IAAF has already banned, as we've discussed, track and field. And as we said today, 7 Russian swimmers were told they can't go. 4 of those withdrawn by the Russian team themselves. But since that ruling yesterday, we've seen 6 other sports who have cleared the Russian teams to enter, among them tennis and diving there. Now, we're expecting to hear from all the other federations in the next couple of days or so, I would say. In addition, you might find some Russian athletes actually appealing against their ban because they've been banned for previous doping convictions, which they've served, and there are plenty of other athletes from other countries who've served a similar ban but are allowed to compete in Rio.
I don't imagine the Russian government is taking this lying down.
No, they might have been quite grateful yesterday because of the decision, but still, the sports minister, Valery Mutko, has written today to Seb Coe, president of the IAAF, to say, look, will you please reconsider your decision? His basis on that is that there are a lot of clean athletes who run for Russia who've been caught up in this. Seb Coe and the IAAF knew that. When they did this blanket ban of track and field athletes, they knew they were going to get some clean athletes caught up in it. I don't think that's going to make much of a difference. I don't think it's going to change his mind. In fact, we have to remember that that decision was tested in the highest sports court and it failed. The Russian appeal failed. Seb Coe hasn't received the letter yet, but I don't think it's going to make much difference when he does.
Steve, thank you very much indeed. Now, finally, if his first proper news conference was anything to go by, the new England manager, Sam Allardyce, has every intention of enjoying his job and making sure the players do the same. That's not really the point, you may say, but he talked about helping them deal with the pressure, and he seemed to be coping with it himself, even teasing his new bosses at the Football Association that they should have given him the job 10 years ago.
His first day in the new job. Forget all that talk about the toughest role in football. A smiling Sam Allardyce said he was feeling right at home.
I think I fit the chair. I hope I do. I think I've got the experience to pass on and not only challenge the England team, but challenge myself.
The first challenge, of course, is lifting a team demoralised by yet another big tournament failure. But player psychology, he says, has always been his strong point.
I can turn things around pretty quickly, and man management is my biggest asset.
There was nothing shy about this first performance in the manager's chair. He even had a dig at the FA for preferring Steve McLaren when he first applied for the job 10 years ago.
I was good enough then. So I don't know. Perhaps it was political, I don't know.
And as for the intensive scrutiny that comes with this role, it didn't put him off for a second.
I think I'm tough enough to take it. So bring it on, lads.
It had to crop up, of course. Allardyce letting his hair down in Spain this summer. A preview of a big England celebration, perhaps. What would it take for us to see that Sam Allardyce dance again?
Well, obviously being successful, not just qualifying for the World Cup, hopefully eventually, but going as far as we possibly can. But I'm not so sure you'll catch me dancing in the near future.
For now, the moves will be more conventional, but built into his contract is potentially another reason to dance. If he needs it, there's another big incentive for Big Sam to do well. If his England team enjoys success in any of the major tournaments, it'll be reflected in the size of an already generous wage packet. They won't say how much, but his predecessor was paid £3.5 million a year for failing. Paul Davis, News at 10, St George's Park.
Now for a look at what might be making the headlines tomorrow. Well, as if we haven't had enough depressing news lately, they'll probably include a breaking story from Japan tonight that at least 15 people have been killed in a knife attack outside Tokyo. Details are just coming in. Head to our website for more on that. Also coming up, the new Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, is due to make her first big announcement. It's about protecting diversity in British society. The precise details are due out at around midnight. I'll be here again tomorrow. But for now, good night, and thank you very much indeed for watching.